My name is Carol Payne. I worked for Firestone for 47 and a half years and recently retired in 2017. My main job was in human resources. That's the department I retired out of. But I was as I first came to work for Firestone, I started in the quality control department as the clerk typist. That was my very first job. But I retired out of the human resource department. Well, quite frankly, I was very excited that I even got a job with Firestone because I had been in Charlotte working for a trucking company right after I got out of school. And I met my husband at the trucking company and stayed there probably about a year and a half. But I had also applied for a job with Firestone in Gastonia because I didn't want to commute to Charlotte. But I was excited that I did get an opportunity to be interviewed, and back then we had tests, as they do now, for employment. But it was an exciting time for me because I was 22 years old and eager to be able to be at the same place that my parents, my mom, both sets of my grandparents. I have an aunt that retired from Firestone, uncles that worked part-time whenever they came home from college and they were in the military. So I was excited to be able to be a part of it because I never knew anything else but Firestone coming up. What I knew mainly about Firestone was that from my grandparents, that's all they used to talk about. They loved working for Firestone. They used to tell me stories that whenever they were coming to work, if they had a job with Firestone, that you didn't even need to apply for anything for credit purposes because it was just solid. You know, if you worked for Firestone, you pretty much got accepted for anything that you wanted back then. And when I came to work for Firestone, the first time I had entered the plant, I'd never been in the plant before. I was overwhelmed because of the loudness of the machines, the atmosphere, the people. I could see the people doing their jobs, going from one place to another. My job was in the plant, but it was in an office area away from the first floor. And I was, as I said earlier, I was the clerk typist, and I worked for the quality control manager. And it was, I felt like a baby, you know, and trying to learn how to walk because I was very overwhelmed because even with the history that we had in the family, I'd never really been inside the plant until then. So it was an experience, but everybody always made me feel comfortable. And during that time, the lab, which they called it the quality control lab, and it was filled with ladies that had been there a long, long time. And they kind of adopted me because I felt like the baby of the group. And it was just, you know, a good place to be. And I felt like I was at home. Every time, I worked for quality control for about 3 years. And then there was an opening in the engineering department, and I applied for that position and got it. And I was I worked for the plant engineer during that time. And it was just, I was moving to another department, moving to another family, because they intercepted me as just being a part of them. And it was just, to me, it was all about family for me. I didn't have any family in those areas, but it was just a good place to be. I felt safe, I felt at home, I looked forward to coming to work, And like I said, I can't remember Firestone never being in my life. I worked for, his name was J.G. Tino. He was a very good manager. I would like to say too, I never had a bad manager. A lot of people can't say that. With my service with Firestone, I never had a bad manager, and I was blessed in that aspect. I'll give you one example, one of the stories that sometimes it tended to be a little, I won't say boring, but there wasn't a whole lot going on as far as me being in the position I was in, except for typing and filing and that kind of thing, interacting with some of the people in the shop area, the maintenance department. But sometimes it just seemed like I was in an office by myself, and I thought it was just, I wish something would happen. I just really would like to see something happen to liven up the place. And I'll never forget, this is a story I've told many times. I said that to Mr. Tano and said, we really need some excitement around here. We need to do something. And unfortunately, about a week later, the treating unit almost burned down in the back. And he had been over there probably a couple of days trying to get everything, because he was over that area as well. And he came, I was coming in that morning, and I sat at my desk, and he looked at me when he opened the door, because he was unshaven for a couple of days, and he said, the next time you say you want something exciting to be happening around here, keep it to yourself, because that was quite an event. And of course, I was just kidding when I said it, and he knew I was kidding, but he was a great guy and worked really hard, and unfortunately, he passed away with a heart attack one day, and I had just left to go home, and we were all on our way home, and my husband and I had gone. We were at the skating rink, and we got a call from my aunt that he had passed away with a heart attack. So I'd never experienced losing a manager. And he was a good friend as well. His family were friends. And so that was quite an experience. I really wasn't. I interacted with a lot of the people because I knew a lot of the people, mainly because of my parents, my mom, my grandparents. They knew me even before I knew them. So they knew who I was, but a lot of them I didn't know who they were. But it didn't take long, because I'm pretty much a people person. And we just had fun, and I would go out and visit them in the plant. And back then we had, I'm sure you've heard this, we had something called smokers in the plant. People could smoke in the plant, and they had their little spot that they would go and a lot of times I would go out there on my break, because my mom was working in that area, and she was a smoker, and I would take my break with her. And so, but it was loud, and people had to, wear the safety apparatus, the glasses, the earplugs, and all that. But when there was an opportunity for me to come to advance to the Human Resource Department. There was an opening, so I applied for that, and thank goodness I did get it. And I never really got involved much in the community activities until I got into human resources. And we did United Way, we did blood drives, we did just a lot of different things like that. And we were really involved in the community that way. It was a lot of fun, and we got our employees to participate, which they loved. I was with HR probably 25, 27 years, somewhere along in there. And I guess that was my favorite position, because like I said, I'm pretty much a people person, and it was a lot of hard work trying to please everyone, but it took me a long time to realize that you can't please everyone. And my first position was insurance clerk, and I dealt with a lot of retirees back then. And back then, the retirees could come in off the street if they had a question for personnel, and they would come in, and sometimes they would even just bring a sandwich and just sit and talk because they wanted to be there working, but they couldn't, so they would just bring their forms and bring a snack and a Coke and just sit there and just chat. And I quite frankly enjoyed that part of my job because I got to know a lot of the retirees as well. Now, my grandparents stayed in their house on Vance Street until they expired. Now, my grandmother got sick, and my uncle had to take her to Greensboro, but my grandfather passed away in that house on Vance Street. But yeah, I don't remember what they first started out paying, but I think it was deducted from their pay. It was a very small amount, and they lived there for forever, it seemed like, because that's where I grew up, in the Mill Village back then. Somewhat, because I visited my grandparents.
What was that like?
Oh, it was great. I will tell you that I don't know that I appreciated it as much when I was younger as I did as I got older, talking to my grandmother, because I would go and sit with her and just visit with her, and I would, all of a sudden, she would stop and look up at the plant, and she would say, "I would give anything if I could be up in that plant right now working." And she was like in her 80s. I mean, she just loved Firestone so much. And so I guess that's where I get my eagerness to, continue working like I did. I think a lot of people did. When I went to work for Firestone in '69, I was young, eager, but when I retired at age 68, I was ready to retire. Whereas I think my grandmother, she, like I said, she was in her 80s, and we would just be talking, and all of a sudden she'd just look up to the plant and say, and she would point to the floor that she worked on and tell me stories about that. When I was working with the retirees, it was like, I won't say all of them were like that, but it was like they didn't want to leave my office because it was their way of coming back to the plant. Now, my grandmother never came back to the plant like that because she had me to handle her insurance or whatever. But some of the retirees I would see them, some of them twice a week. And then a lot of times they would just come and visit. And as far as that being in my job description, I guess I put it there because I felt like it was just a need that people wanted to have someone to come and talk to about their insurance, about whatever they wanted to talk to about. I would run into retirees at the track walking all the time, and never ever did I go to the track without helping someone with their insurance as I was walking at the track. So it was just, a good place to be, and I look forward to every morning to going to work. And it was kind of, sometimes I'd hate to admit it, but sometimes it would get quite annoying to not be able to do a lot of your job, and you feel like you don't get a lot accomplished during the day when you sit and talk all day. But then I grew to appreciate the fact that when I get older, I would want somebody to help me with my forms and file my insurance, and that was the insurance clerk was my first HR opportunity. And years later, we had one of the ladies retire in the department, and she was the administrative assistant, or secretary back then, is what it was called. So I applied for that, and it was actually just one office next door, and thankfully I did get that job. And then there was just a lot of things to do. I still worked with the people, the retirees, because they came over and saw that I was there. And but there was a lot of paperwork, there was computer work that we did, and we back then, everything now is outsourced through a lot of the Firestone benefits and all that, whereas in human resources, we handled a lot of it on site. We filed claims, we just did a lot of things like that. And my job in there was filing, typing, computer work, just interacting with the people in the plant. One of my best memories is that I could almost every single day, I could see my mom, because my mom worked in the plant, and she would come out and visit with me. If it was 5 minutes, sometimes it was longer, sometimes I didn't see her at all, but I did get to see her. And my mom started out working with Firestone as a splicer, and the only way I knew what that was she would come home from work and have black spray all over her shirts. And she said she was a splicer. And one of the memories I will share with you when I was growing up, when I think I was probably 7 or 8 years old, we lived on King Street, and my mom was working the third shift that night, and she and a couple of her friends were looking out the window. I think she was on the 3rd or 4th floor, and our house burned, and she could see the house, but she didn't know it was our house, but it was. And I'll never forget the fact that people rallied around us even back then. And to me, it was just, a family, taking care of family.
Was anyone hurt?
No, we were all fine. My dad was home, and my brother, sister, and I were all fine. But the reason I think I was 7 or 8, because my sister and I are 7 years apart, and she was in the crib. So I was 7 or 8 years old. My mom was here 39 years and retired. My mom started out working as a splicer, and then she moved into the weave room, which probably is the same department that she worked in as a splicer. But she later, I would say, got promoted to being a clerk in the office to help some of the supervisors with their paperwork. So she came off of the floor probably about 5 years before she retired, and she loved it. She had been there a long time, and so she was quite a people person too. She loved to talk to everybody, and she was very well liked. I think all 4 of my grandparents, my mom's side and my dad's side, I think they all worked out of the twisting department. I don't have memories of my grandparents being there when I was there, because they had already retired. I would, of course, visit, on the floor, because there were offices there as well. But I remember working on the Firestone newsletter back then, and we would go out and take pictures of some of the workers. But my grandparents, all I have is just stories about some of the things they would share of being employed. The shifts that back when I was working at Firestone in Gastonia, they it was, I think, 7 to 3, 3 to 11, and 11 to 7, if I remember correctly. And yes, it was 3 shifts. And we had a lot of people. My office was, I don't know if you ever saw the little gray building out front. That's where my office was in Human Resources. And there was this... It was a little wooden gray building, yes. Then there was a little it was just a little area where people would, on the other side, would go in and visit with their employees waiting on shift change. And some of the people would come in and wait on their parents to come out and sit out there and, just wait. And so it could get quite congested, but a lot of times we would go out, some of the staff would go out and talk to them. And a lot of times they came out to HR before they went home if they had any issues that we needed to take care of for them. Well, I learned whenever I was working in HR, we found out that there possibly could be a new plant that may be built in Kings Mountain. And I remember hoping that I was going to be part of it because we didn't know who I was going to go and who wasn't. So, but I moved up to the Kings Mountain plant in 1993, and there were a lot of mixed emotions about it. And growing up, I know whenever I was growing up, and my husband will tell you this too, because he felt the same way. Whenever we would go to a movie or whatever, we always thought things were going to stay the same forever. They were never going to change, and it's just it was the change that needed to be done, and it was probably the best thing for the plant, because it was time. It was time to move, because the plant was getting old, and there were a lot of issues with the floor and the grease and that kind of thing. Like I said, I didn't go out into the plant a whole lot, but these are stories that that people would share. I worked with Juggy. I did not work for him, but he was probably one of my best friends at Firestone while we were there. I shared this with Amanda. Whenever I first met Juggy, I had been, it was in 1992. I met him before that, but he had been on a business trip, and my mom, who he was very close to as well, they were buddies. And my mom was sick with cancer, and I'll never forget, I had been out with her and when she passed, and Juggy went on a trip several months later, and that was in 1992. And in July of 92, my brother and my sister-in-law and my niece were killed instantly in a car accident. And I lost my mom in May, which today is the anniversary of that. And in July, I lost my brother, my sister-in-law, and my niece. And I was out of work again for probably 3 weeks. And Juggy was coming back from his business trip. And I had been out in the plant in one of the offices to visit with one of the girls. And as I came back into the plant to go back to my office, Juggy was walking toward me, and he had his briefcase and something else. And these are the kinds of things that you really remember when you know you have a really good friend. When he saw me, we embraced. He put his suitcase down. He put his briefcase down, and he hugged me, And he whispered to me, he said, if you need more time, you take it. Because he did not find out until he was on his business trip that I'd lost my brother. And he was just, that, I'll never forget that story. It just meant so much to me. And we've always been friends. I could count on him and he could count on me. And that's the way I felt about him. And still do, really. Well, whenever I was working with, Jim Pridgeon was the president at the time that, in the last several years of my retirement, before I retired. And Jim Pridgeon we had a few Japanese visitors, and we had some other people that came in for a tour as they were working on this facility. And he invited me to come because they were doing some of the apartments, and he just wanted me to see it. So I joined them, and it was when I walked in the door, of course it wasn't the same place that I had left, but I found myself trying to place myself where the offices were, where I used to visit my friends, where the machines were, and it was like I was just frozen in time. And I won't forget that Jim Pridgeon said, "Carol, you need to catch up." And it was like I couldn't move. It was just overwhelming because I kept trying to picture myself as to where I was during that time when I worked here. I guess having the nickname historian, my HR manager, who is still there now, pretty much gave me that name because anytime he would meet somebody out off-site, or anytime somebody would call him and ask him a question that were retired, he would always have me in the office. Do you remember so-and-so? And thank God I still have a pretty good memory. And we had our 75th anniversary celebration at the new plant years after we were there. And I was on the historian committee. And so I had a good rapport still with the retirees, and I would call them and ask them for pictures, and did they have an old typewriter? Did they have whatever it was they could share so we could bring it to the plant? They would get it back. We would make sure it would be coming back to them in good shape, but a lot of times I had to beg for it, and just make sure that we assured them that they would get their papers back or whatever they wanted to share their pictures. But that's how I pretty much got the name as historian, because once in a while I'll still get a call. Do you remember so-and-so? Because they said they worked here and so-and-so, those kinds of things. So yeah, and it's really funny, I can run into people now that have retired, and I see them and I recognize them. Whenever I was growing up, my grandparents, I had my mom's set of parents lived on Vance Street, and I didn't live there all the time, but I visited quite often, and it was very quaint, it was very clean. I just felt so at home there, and I thought, when I get older, I think I would just like to live here because it was near my job and near a lot of people that I knew, and then I had my dad's set of my grandparents that were my dad's parents. They lived on 2nd Avenue, and it was the same way. It was just comfortable to go visit, and I stayed at my mom's on Vance Street, my grandparents there, more than I did at the other place. But both houses were just really good housekeepers, and they loved their home. They were proud of their home. They took care of it, and had a lot of pride. I think the people that lived on Vance Street and even on the other streets back in there, they really appreciated what they had. They had worked hard for it.